By the time Nathan Carter reached the elevator bank, the applause hadn't slowed down enough for anyone to notice him leave. Inside the box, wedged against his hip, 2 gold trophies, a coffee mug that read 5 years #1 sales champion, and a photo of his daughter laughing on his shoulders at last summer's county fair. Above the crowd, the leaderboard screen still had his name on it, 5 consecutive quarters at the top, because in the rush to celebrate someone else, nobody had thought to take it down. Near the cake table, Elise Weston held a folder stamped Vice President against her chest, while her father's hand rested on her shoulder like they were posing for a press photo. The floor was already turning towards someone else. As the elevator doors began to slide shut, Nathan caught the barest edge of her, a dark blazer, the click of expensive heels crossing toward the corner office that was supposed to have his name on the door, a trail of perfume that reached him a full second before she did. He never saw her face. The doors closed before he could turn his head, and some tired, proud part of him decided he didn't need to. Whoever she was, she had what he'd earned. That was the only fact that mattered. He carried that unfinished memory with him longer than he meant to. A shape without features, a scent without a name, filed away the way you file away a door closing behind you for good. If you believe hard work should count for more than blood, stay close, comment the city you're watching from, and I'll come say hello myself as we watch this one play out together. The 8 months of savings Nathan had calculated the night he quit lasted 4. He hadn't accounted for how fast a blacklisted name spreads through an industry, how many interviews evaporated within days of a callback, how quickly polite silence from old contacts turns into no response at all. By the 3rd month, Nathan stopped applying to firms that knew his name and started applying to jobs that didn't ask for a resume. He drove for a delivery app until 2 in the morning some nights, dropping off other people's dinners in a car with a check engine light he couldn't afford to fix, then came home to stock shelves at a warehouse 3 towns over where nobody recognized the man who used to close 9-figure deals in his sleep. He never told Caleb or Ivy where the money was actually coming from. He told them Daddy had a new job that let him be home more, which was true in the way lies are true when you need your children to keep believing in you a little longer. He hid the exhaustion the same way he'd once hidden the cardboard box, behind a closed door, out of sight, so it couldn't become one more thing they had to carry. The kitchen table became the only place that still belonged to him. After the kids were asleep and the warehouse shift finally let go of his shoulders, Nathan opened his laptop at the same chipped table where Ivy did her homework and started building something nobody had asked him for and nobody was paying him to make, a system that could predict supply chain failures before they happened, stitched together an hour at a time between shifts, some nights so tired he fell asleep mid-sentence with his cursor still blinking. It wasn't a business plan. For a long time, it wasn't even a plan at all. It was just the only thing left that made him feel like the man he used to be before a phone call from Gerald Weston made sure nobody in the industry would return his calls. It took 18 months of night shifts and cold coffee before the software did anything he could actually sell. It took another 6 before the first client, a small distributor in Tulsa who couldn't afford anyone bigger, agreed to pay him anything for it at all. Somewhere in those quiet months, the industry chatter about Weston Global started to change, without Nathan paying much attention to it. A trade newsletter mentioned 2 major accounts walking away within the same quarter. A former colleague, texting to check in out of guilt more than friendship, mentioned layoffs on the operations floor that hadn't made it into any press release. Nathan noticed the way you notice weather changing outside a window you're too busy to look through, a headline here, a rumor there, nothing that felt like it belonged to him anymore. He was too busy keeping 2 kids fed on a warehouse paycheck and a software company that existed mostly as a folder on his laptop to spend much time thinking about the empire that had thrown him away. 2 years in, Nathan's kitchen table software had a name, 3 real clients, and enough revenue that he finally gave notice at the warehouse without flinching. It still lived entirely on one encrypted flash drive, no cloud backup, no shared servers, Nothing anyone could subpoena or hack their way into, because Nathan had learned the hard way what happens when you trust an institution to protect what you've built. He carried that drive everywhere, out of habit more than paranoia, until paranoia and habit stopped being two different things. By then, the rumors about Weston Global had turned into something closer to fact. A regional trade paper ran a short piece about the firm losing its second largest client in 18 months. Nathan read it standing in his own small office, and for the first time since he'd carried that box out the door, he let himself wonder what Gerald Weston's daughter was doing now that the empire she'd inherited was starting to crack under her. He met Elena on a Tuesday he almost canceled, a mutual friend's dinner, a seat that opened up at the last minute, a woman in a soft gray sweater who laughed at herself before Nathan even had the chance to. She didn't ask what he did for a living the way most people did, like his job was the interesting part of him. She asked about his kids first. She remembered Caleb's name after hearing it once, Nathan, who hadn't let himself want anything outside of his children in almost 3 exhausting years, found himself wanting to see her again before she'd even finished her coffee. It was easy with her. In a way, nothing else in his life had been easy. That should have been the first thing that worried him. It wasn't. The small things came slowly enough that Nathan barely noticed them arriving. Elena asked, once, in the middle of an otherwise easy conversation, exactly how his software decided which shipments to prioritize. A specific question, phrased like she already understood the architecture, from a woman who'd told him she worked in marketing. He answered without thinking twice about it. It was only later, alone, that the question sat strangely in his memory, too precise for someone who supposedly didn't know the industry. Then there was the perfume. She wore it the night she stayed for dinner at his place, leaning over his shoulder to look at a photo on the wall, and for one disorienting second, Nathan was standing at the elevator bank 3 years earlier, watching a stranger's silhouette disappear into an office that should have been his. He said nothing. He told himself it was a common scent, that plenty of women wore it, that he was building ghosts out of nothing, but some quiet, careful part of him, the same part that had once memorized every lost account at Weston Global, started paying closer attention. If a small detail has ever unlocked a memory you'd buried on purpose, you know exactly how unsettling this moment was for Nathan. Comment your city below. I'll say hello myself. It took him 4 days of quiet, careful looking to find what he needed. A photo from an industry gala, 3 years old, tagged with a name that wasn't Elena. A face that matched, once you knew to look past the glasses and the softer hair. Elise Weston, the chairman's daughter, the same woman, he now understood, whose heels he'd heard click past him on his way out the door the day everything fell apart. He pulled up the trade articles he'd half read over the last year and reread them properly this time. 2 lost accounts, a quiet round of layoffs, a credit rating downgrade nobody at Weston Global wanted publicized. Elise wasn't dating a struggling single dad by coincidence. She was running out of time, and Nathan's software was the only thing left that could save what her father had built. He didn't confront her. He didn't even let his voice change the next time she called. Some fights, Nathan had learned in a warehouse at 2 a.m, you don't win by swinging first. What Nathan did instead was build a copy. Same silver casing, same weight in his palm, a drive that looked identical down to the small scratch near the plug, except the files on it led nowhere, a maze of code that would waste whoever opened it hours of confusion before it revealed itself as nothing at all. He moved the real drive somewhere Elena had never once laid eyes on. Then he let his office door sit unlocked, just slightly, on a night he made sure she knew he'd be distracted in the kitchen. He played the fool so convincingly that some nights he almost believed it himself, that this was still just a man falling for a woman in a gray sweater, and not 2 people quietly measuring each other for the same trap. The dinner she chose to make her move was one of the easiest nights they'd had together. Wine, laughter, Caleb's drawing still taped to the fridge behind her while she stirred something on the stove. Halfway through, her phone buzzed with a fake emergency only she knew was fake, and she excused herself down the hall with an apology already halfway out of her mouth. Nathan stayed at the table, listening to the soft sound of his office door easing open, the drawer he'd left unlocked, the faint zip of her bag. He didn't move. He'd already watched this exact moment happen 100 times in his head, and every version of it ended the same way, with her walking out of his apartment, convinced she'd won. She kissed him goodnight like nothing had happened. He let her. 3 days later, in a boardroom that had once belonged entirely to her father, Elise Weston plugged the stolen drive into the company's mainframe with the kind of triumphant calm that comes right before everything falls apart. The room around her told its own story if anyone had bothered to look. Half the desks on the floor below sat empty, a skeleton staff working out the last of a company hemorrhaging clients it could no longer afford to lose. She was already picturing the headline that would erase all of it. The daughter who single-handedly saved Weston Global, when the screen flickered and resolved into a single line of text where the algorithm should have been, "Looking for something, Elise?" Her phone rang before she'd finished reading it twice. Nathan's voice on the other end was steady in a way she'd never heard from him before, none of the warmth from their dinners left in it at all. He told her, without raising his voice once, exactly how long he'd known who she was. The perfume, the too specific question, the unlocked drawer he'd left open on purpose. He told her the drive in her hand had never held a single real file. Then he told her the truth would already be spreading through the industry by morning, whether or not she ever admitted to any of it herself. Elise didn't threaten him. She didn't try to bargain. Stripped of the disguise and the leverage in the same breath, she asked him, quietly, if there was any version of this where he didn't destroy what was left of her family's name. Nathan walked into Gerald Weston's office 2 days later, and for the first time in 3 years, nobody in that building looked at him like an employee waiting to be noticed. Gerald sat behind the same desk he'd once used to announce his daughter's promotion, visibly smaller than Nathan remembered, the company around him collapsing under debts that had nothing left to hide behind. Elise sat beside her father, the glasses and the soft sweater gone, back in the sharp corporate lines Nathan now understood had always been closer to the truth of her than Elena ever was. They met a week later, not in Gerald Weston's office this time, but in a neutral conference room downtown, attorneys from both sides seated at either end of a long table with drafts of the agreement stacked in front of them. Gerald sat between his own counsel and his daughter, visibly smaller than Nathan remembered, a man who had spent 3 years assuming this meeting would never come. Nathan's lawyer walked the room through the terms line by line, full licensing rights to the software, granted only in exchange for controlling shares of Weston Global, effective the moment both signatures hit the page. No handshake deal, no verbal promises he'd have to chase down later. Nathan had learned that lesson already, once, the hard way. Nathan set the real flash drive on the table between them, still in its case, still untouched. He told them exactly what it would cost to save the company. Not a favor, not a partnership between equals, but controlling shares, signed over completely, before he'd let a single line of his code touch their systems. Gerald started to argue out of habit more than conviction. Elise put a hand on her father's arm and told him, quietly, that there was nothing left to negotiate with. Nathan didn't gloat. He didn't need to. He picked up the pen they slid across the table, signed his name where it mattered, and walked out of the building that had once thrown him away, not chasing anyone's approval this time, just certain, finally, of exactly what he was worth. Gerald signed first, his pen moving slower than it needed to. Elise signed after him, and when she looked up from the page, there was no performance left in her expression at all, just the plain, tired relief of someone who'd run out of other options and finally stopped fighting, the only one still on the table. The attorneys exchanged copies, initialed the final pages, and confirmed the transfer would be filed with the state by the end of the week. It took 11 minutes, start to finish, to undo 3 years of somebody else's arrogance. Nathan drove home that afternoon and did something he hadn't done in longer than he could comfortably admit. He picked Caleb and Ivy up from school himself. No calls to take, no client fires to put out, just three of them in the car, with the radio too loud, and Ivy arguing with her brother over which song played next. He didn't tell them about the meeting. He didn't need to. What mattered was that he was there, on a Tuesday afternoon, with nowhere else he had to be. Weston Global kept its name and most of its staff, but it ran differently now, under terms Nathan controlled and a board that answered to him first. He didn't move into Gerald's old office. He didn't need the symbolism anymore. His real company, the one built at a chipped kitchen table between warehouse shifts, the one that had actually saved him, kept growing on its own, client by client, exactly the way it had before any of this started, except now nobody in the industry pretended not to know his name. If you've ever needed proof that patience outlasts every con eventually, this is it. Subscribe if you want to see what Nathan builds next, and comment where in the world you're watching from. I'll be reading every single one.